I am very excited to present our second keynote of this Technology and Psychiatry Summit. Dr. Rhoda Au joins us from Boston University, where she's the professor of, these are all different departments, anatomy, neurobiology, neurology, medicine, and epidemiology. So to say that Dr. Au wears different hats, I think, is an understatement. At Boston University. Dr. Au is also the co-PI of the Brain Aging Program of the Framingham Heart Study, and in fact has been involved in the Framingham Heart Study, I think one of the most important studies in all of healthcare for 33 years, is that right? Wow. She's also director of the Global Cohort Development for the Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative, and really, I think, has been a transformative leader in the field of neuropsychology. So neuropsychology, I think, is a critical part of discipline in aging and in mental health, but has been one that traditionally has not been quick to incorporate maybe more novel, innovative methods. Dr. Au has been beating the drum of digital technology and neuropsychology for over a decade now, many years, long before really anyone else was doing that. And so I think we're very fortunate to have her here today and hear her perspective and where we're headed and the role of digital technology in thinking about brain health. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for inviting me, because I am a neuropsychologist, and I don't actually do work in mental health, although I aspire to. So I'm hoping that maybe one of the things that will come out of this talk is that we can start to bring our worlds that right now tend to be a bit separate, right? Neuropsychology, cognition. I like to say that I work in brain health rather than cognitive health, because I think that this separation between cognition and mental health is a bit artificial. So that's why I really appreciate this opportunity to come and talk to you, and hopefully we can start to merge our worlds together. So just to start with, I do have a few disclosures. I actually always think it's interesting that I have disclosures because, I work for Framingham. It's an observational study. I'm a neuropsychologist. I don't treat people with drugs. I don't do clinical trials. But the reason I even have any disclosures is because pharma has become interested in digital. And that's really important, because if you've got pharma interested in it, you've got investment dollars behind that. And that's something to keep in mind, I think, for everybody in this room as well. So I'm going to just put this up there just because I thought I should bring a mental health focus in, even though I don't do that work directly. This is not anything new to any of you. This is a big issue, and it's a big issue worldwide. And mental health disorders really span a whole broad spectrum of different disorders, right? So there's a very big global problem. Now, the issue, though, is that currently these are the types of methods that we typically use when we're trying to study both mental health as well as cognitive health. And the problem with that is that it's leading to biased knowledge. So it turns out that there's a lot of problems of representativeness in the field. And so if we think about just from a racial ethnic standpoint, we find that, this was just sort of a general review that showed that there is significant bias in terms of representing people of all races and ethnicities. And this is true also in the realm of cognitive health and Alzheimer's disease. The vast majority of studies tend to focus on people who are of white European descent, and that there are lots and lots of other racial ethnic groups that are being left behind. So, so here's the thing. We know the problem. The question is, why don't we do something about it? And it turns out it's because change is really hard. And what we end up doing is we end up fitting our science into the methods that we know, the methods that we're familiar with. And in fact, what we really have to do is we have to think about doing it from a different perspective. So I always find it interesting when I'm traveling internationally. I like to stop at McDonald's, and I like to look at all their different menus. And you know why? Because they localize them and they customize them. And that's what I think we need to do from a research standpoint. We need to stop fitting our science into the methods, and we need to start developing the methods that will fit the science. So it's really time now to think about how we can do that. And it turns out technology gives us some solutions that will really let us do this in a much more equitable way. So just to remind, this also means we have to rethink how we do things. You know, we typically in research, we have a very linear approach that, you know, is represented here. And in fact, if we really want to change things, we actually need to start with the problem itself, and we need to work backwards. That's how we're going to rethink the methods and how we do things. So this is really where I think digital provides us an opportunity. And this is a very new opportunity. Even the FDA did not initiate its own digital action plan until 2020. That's only a few years ago, right? And they established some pathways for which to start getting digital approved. But again, how that pathway really works is still a work in progress. And they established now their own digital health center of excellence. In fact, most recently, as in like the last month or so, they've now started to put together a committee to start to figure out how are we really going to open up this pathway within the FDA to make digital a real reality. So this is all very new. But what I like to point out is a lot of people like to talk about the digital divide. It also turns out that digital is the way in which we can equalize, because it will lower barriers. You don't necessarily have to come in. There's lots and lots of barriers to doing research that requires people to come in, that requires expertise that isn't necessarily available everywhere. And you can do it at far lower cost. You can make changes very quickly and that are adaptive at the individual level and as things evolve. And then, of course, we can open up sort of a whole new field. So what does this digital reality potentially look like? Well, you know, I'm kind of pragmatic. So what you do is you have to start with what you know. And this is kind of typically the way we go about doing our research. We collect information, we might get some blood, some imaging, et cetera. And now, currently, we're starting to add layers of digital. But most of that digital technology is still fitting into what I would say the norm of being high cost and high burden. And it's, you know, you have to come in, you have to do it, you have to buy these devices, you have to have a healthcare professional involved. And what we need to move is more toward other digital technologies that take it outside of the healthcare system and the clinic. That will help lower costs. It will certainly lower burden on the healthcare system itself, and hopefully it'll help lower some burden for the patients involved. But ultimately, what we need to do is really move it into multi-sensor solutions that really can be done at scale at far lower cost and far lower burden. So I want to sort of use blood as an example because of where I think digital needs to go. Because blood really changed everything. And today, everybody, almost anywhere, can collect blood, right? And then we measure blood across lots of disease markers, right? Blood is not used for any single disease, any single symptom. It's actually a raw tube of blood has potential across multiple diseases and multiple markers. And then after we do the measures that we know about, we store it. And we store it for what's going to come down the pike. So what's happened with blood, and I'm part of the Framingham Heart Study, we started storing blood years and years ago, well before the world of genetics emerged. And because of that stored blood, we were able to, as this new technology came about, as these new assays came, we were able to open up a whole new field of genomics, right? And so what we continue to do is we continued this idea of, sure, we'll collect blood, we'll measure it for what we're interested in today, and then we'll continue to store it for the future. So in that way, it turns out that digital you can use in the same conceptual way. You can collect digital. You can analyze it in all the different ways that are emerging, a lot of the data science AI methods, and then you can store it and wait for what's to come. So in that way, I think of digital is potentially the new blood. So I want you to listen just for a second.
926. 926.
So this is actually a participant who was at the first time that they were evaluated, were determined not to be demented. And then years later, they were tested again, and they were considered to be in the mild stages, mild cognitive impairment stages. What's important to note is that the response was the same both times. It's 926, right? And it turns out that that response was correct. So if you use sort of traditional scoring methods, you would have said this person is perfectly fine. But I think you could hear that there was a difference, and it was in the difference in the way they said the response rather than the response itself. And that's really what I think the power of digital can capture in a way that what we're doing now isn't doing. So I want to give you an example of this concept of digital as the new blood. Turns out at Framingham, I've been collecting digital voice recordings since 2005. We actually have over 10,000 of these recordings over a period of time, including when participants were still considered cognitively normal and then have longitudinally progressed to disease. But what I want to point out, and you don't have to read all this, it's kind of messy, the take-home point is even though I've been collecting this for many years, my first publication wasn't until 2017, and it wasn't even in a clinical journal, I want to mention. Turns out that all my papers in the clinical journals didn't happen until the last few years. And so this is where we collected digital, we stored digital, and then we waited for the world to catch up in how to analyze digital. And so, so this is sort of some of the digital work that we're doing now at Framingham. We do digital pen, we continue to do digital voice, and we've now moved into the smartphone as well. And then, in addition, we've sort of been capturing and harnessing the power of the smartphone. Smartphone is really important. It's the most penetrating technology in the world. There are 301 million people in the US who own a smartphone. There are 6.8 billion people in the world who have one. This is the tool that can be used to bridge a lot of these gaps because every smartphone has at least 27 different sensors in it. These are data collection tools, and everybody's carrying this computer in the palm of their hand. And that's how we're going to probably help democratize the kind of work we're trying to do across, not just within the US, but across the world. So today, there's lots of uses now of digital technology in the healthcare space. What I think is really important to realize is that, currently, all the rage is the term digital biomarkers, right? Yeah, you hear it all the time. Actually, when I first started using those words, I was told I couldn't, but that was many years ago. Now they've become all the rage. But what I like to remind everybody is that most of what we're doing so far is digital phenotyping. We're actually still a long ways away from getting to the reality of digital biomarkers. And I want to just show you, I sort of took this screenshot literally last night using these search terms. And you can see we have a long way to go because over the past few years, you have a grand total of about 79 publications and counting that actually address the issue of digital biomarkers within the mental health space. So this is an area that we still, that's still much more likely to come. So in order to make that a reality, we have to actually kind of recalibrate. And so what I like to do is, I like to remind everybody that when we think about innovation, we often say things like, well, we need to think out of the box. And what I like to caution people is the idea of what happens if it's not a box. Because when you take from where you are and you just try to take a little step forward, you're actually not moving forward in a way that can really revolutionize what is possible. So one of the things I think we need to do to get to this digital reality is we need to stop using active engagement technologies, which are things that you have to interact with on a regular basis, and move to passive engagement technology, whether it's online, whether it's on a computer, through your smartphone, and also through in-home devices. They're out there. We just need to start utilizing them. Also very, very, very important is if you're going to embark on this pathway, you need to prioritize the use of digital data, collection of digital data, in its native format. It is not useful to actually use derived measures of digital signal. So my colleague Vijaya Kolachalama is a data science AI person, and what he does is he specializes in the idea of taking the raw digital data streams and analyzing those in its purest form. And why do you need to do that? It's because the average technology life cycle is about 6 months. That means no matter what's best of class right now, 6 months to a year from now, it's going to be obsolete. And the only way you're going to protect, futurize your research, which you need to do longitudinally likely, is you have to stick to that raw digital signal. Because once you have the raw digital data, as new algorithms come in, you can actually reanalyze them and bring them up to contemporary standards. So it's really important when you move into the digital field to think about how you're collecting the data, not just what you're collecting. And so these are some of the work that Vijaya has been doing. He's been doing it with our raw audio recordings. He's done a lot with imaging. Brain scans are digital images as well. And now what we're starting to do is do combined analyses. So now, everything I talked about is much more in the future than it is today. So what are we going to do in order to accelerate this whole process? And what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to figure out ways to share this data and to share it broadly. So it turns out that this concept of data sharing is something that we all talk about. The NIH is starting to mandate it, and yet we're still not very good at it. And one of the things that we really need to do is really give a committed effort to figuring out how to share our data much more effectively. And it turns out that as we learn to share data, we will start to do it between us. And in that way, we're going to build the kinds of data resources that have been discussed today to avoid some of the biases that are inherent when we're trying to move into this AI field. So where can all this lead to? Well, here are some of the projects actually that we're starting to move forward. We're trying to think about how do you bring all of this into the clinical care setting, and so we can do it for acute cases. You know, I know that because we've been trying to develop some studies with Boston Medical Center with our WellSense program. So this is a insurance program for people who are dual eligible. So that means Medicare and Medicaid. It's very complex patient mix. All of them have some sort of cognitive or mental health issue, and we have to think about how do we monitor them, even in their acute phases when they have these acute behavioral situations that lead them to continuously end up in the emergency room. So these are some of the ideas that we're having about how do we track some of their natural behaviors. And then we've been building sort of a whole digital ecosystem around that to think about them from a whole person standpoint, and how do we bring all sorts of different technologies, as well as traditional clinical care or clinical data elements that are important. So I think the other thing that we need to think about is how do we now use digital technology to monitor our natural behaviors in such a way that instead of testing the symptoms of interest, we actually start to infer it. So I think that, you know, for all of you, you know that when someone has a mental health issue, it's not something that can be accurately captured when you're looking at it, testing it in very sporadic ways. So if we can use digital to monitor our behaviors as we're moving through our natural environment on an ongoing basis, you're going to be able to infer, which will be far more accurate than testing it. So in thinking about where digital can really go, I actually like to look to the space community for inspiration. Because, you know, in the space community, in the space discovery, they often set objectives where there's no roadmap at how to get there. But nonetheless, they set their eye on something that's way far afield, and then they work together in a community in order to actually solve to that problem. And I really think that that's really where we should be taking our inspiration in figuring out how we're going to move all this forward. So in that vein, I like to sort of push my version of what I think a digital biomarker really needs to look like. I don't think it's going to be something that can be captured in one device, one sensor, one profile, one anything. I think it's going to be multi-sensor in terms of the information that we need. We're going to have to work with our data science AI colleagues in order to deal with the multidimensionality of that data. And then I think what we also have to do is rethink what is it that we're looking for that's that signal. And so I think it's actually going to be a very fluid, dynamic pattern that's always changing. So you think about it. Think about your mental health cases. Think about the symptoms that they have. There's nothing persistent and consistent on a day-to-day basis, right? There's lots of fluctuations, different combinations. You ask the patient, what are some of their symptoms? They'll give you one set of examples. You ask their family member, they'll give you other examples. You ask another family member, and they'll give you yet another set of examples. And yet, when you put all of them together, it paints a very accurate picture. That's what we need digital to accomplish for us. And that's really what I think is what a digital biomarker in the realm of really complex, heterogeneous disorders is going to need to look like in order for us to achieve our goal. And if we do, this is going to set the stage to allow us to do precision care. So we're going to collect the data, have it analyzed through these data science AI pipelines, probably continuously to collect it as the person's moving through their environment, feeding it into the clinical care team, and doing that loop over and over again. Now, one of the things I think it's really important, and these are sort of my last words, is to think about, well, who should be involved? Who should be helping us to solve this problem? And I think what's really, really important is that as we think about who should be in the room to work with ours, we need to be very careful about being prescriptive, because it turns out that we don't know who has the capabilities that we need. So we need to be very careful about who we think is a qualified researcher. And if we do that, and we come together as a community where from wherever you are, we'll be able to hit our targets. And with that, I'll end, and thank you very much.
What an inspiring talk. Thank you so much. It's incredibly illuminating. So I was hoping you could speak a little bit more to the work that you're doing in terms of combining the voice signatures to the fMRI data. I'm working on a project where we're collecting both of those in older adults and looking at momentary cognition. So it's something that we were running into some challenges conceptualizing, so it would be useful to hear.
Sure. I mean, the realm of digital voice analysis is still really evolving, but so first of all, I just need to acknowledge the fact that working with digital voice in particular has its challenges because of the identifying information that's inherent in the voice print, right? So I will tell you where we're spending a lot of time and energy right now is figuring out how to de-identify that raw audio recording. Because what we're very interested is in both the audio features as well as the linguistics features. The linguistics features now are much easier to deal with today than they were, let's say, 5 years ago, back when I was working on this, because now we have automated transcription, right? And so even though they're not highly accurate, they're not 100% accurate compared to manual transcription. It turns out that it takes about 15 hours of manual labor to do 1 hour of transcription for 1 hour of audio recording. So, I have 10,000 recordings, so that was kind of like, ooh, my children are not even gonna be alive by the time we transcribe these all. So what happened was my data science AI colleagues kind of stepped forward and they said, give it to us. We'll process it. And I'm like, all right. And they said, well, it's going to take us a while. I thought, yeah, I know about that. It's going to take years, et cetera. And they go, no, it's going to take us a few weeks. And so they pushed it through their pipeline. The accuracy is probably around 90%, right? They ran analyses that looked at both the manual transcriptions against the automated transcription. It turns out that the data science AI methods can tolerate some inaccuracy because they're getting the same results. So the linguistic side of that is really easy, right? It's the audio side that's hard, but the audio side has that richness to it. You heard it in that recording. I'm sure you hear it in your patients all the time, right? So that's the part that we're really focusing on. So we're trying to think about how do we do voice alteration without destroying the audio features themselves, but do it in a way so that if the person who gave the recording listened to it, they couldn't even recognize their own voice, right? But we have to do it in a way that it can't be reversed engineered. So that's really the challenge right now around the digital voice in order to open it up, right? Internally, we do a lot of digital voice processing, but keeping it in our hands is not the way to open up the science, right? And then the imaging, now we have facial masking software so that can be more readily. But it's really about then once you have this, you take the raw and you put that through. And that's going to give you a dimension that doing the derived measures and doing it the standard way, you're going to lose. So I hope that helps answer your question.
And if I could be particularly greedy, one more second question. In terms of the mobile cognitive tests that you've utilized in this study, there's a lot of different alternatives I've seen out on the market. I'd just love to hear your suggestions of which measures you think would be more valid for repeated task usage.
Yeah, so I try really hard to be test agnostic. I work with lots of different vendors these days, by the way, and here's what I do. I believe them. You tell me that your test is great, I believe you. It's probably great. That's not what I asked for. What I asked for is I asked for the raw. I want the metadata underneath. I want that sensor-based data. I want the screen-based behavior, the timestamp coordinates, and I want the audio recording, right? I want the GPS. I want the accelerometer information. That's what's of value to me, because then I can do my own little bake-offs, right? I can say, all right, here's the raw sensor data. This company uses that data in this way and derives these measures. This company does over here. And let's compare and see who does best. And you know what? I guarantee you there's no one solution that's best either, right? We're talking about disorders that are probably insidious in onset. They're chronic. They evolve. There's probably value in all of these solutions. It's about that right solution at the right time for the right person in the right way. So that's what I do, is I only, not always, but I often will only enter into my relationships if you give me the raw data too. So I hope that helps.
That helps tremendously. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. It was super interesting. I also have a question about this raw data. So what exactly do you mean by analyzing the raw data? Not do pre-processing anymore, but that you
Yeah.
can't really skip that step, I would say. So what do you mean exactly?
Yeah, I want it in its raw sensor-based form. So when we do the digital voice recording, so we started just recording people's spoken responses to neuropsych tests, and we literally just record it digitally, download that, and analyze that. We don't do anything else other than making sure it's of sufficient quality to be analyzed, right? But we just push it. And when we say we, that's not me. That's my data science AI colleagues who are doing it, where they just say, give me that raw recording. Don't touch it. Don't derive it. Don't do anything else. Just give it to me, and I'm going to measure in that so that I get that full differentiality. You know, imaging is a good example right now. You know, it was very common to take brain MRI images and then push it through a processing pipeline. You know, we use FreeSurfer. We derive measures of cortical thickness, you know, total brain volume, white matter hyperintensities, et cetera. What my data scientists are saying is, I don't want that. I don't want to do that. I just want I want the raw DICOM files, right? And I'm going to analyze that. And when I do that, I'm actually going to be able to take images from different machines with slightly different sequences. So at Framingham, we have scans, because we started in 1999, so we have scans that were collected on the same people, 1T scanner, 1.5T scanner, 3T scanner. That's really hard to harmonize. From a manual standpoint, it turns out that the data science can do it. My colleague Vijaya Kolachalama, he used some methods in which he made all the images on an equal plane, right? But he could only do that if he had the raw images to start. Same thing with the audio recordings. We're collecting it, you know, we had different recorders back in 2005 compared to what we're using now. Now we're doing it on the smartphone. Sometimes we're doing it on the tablet. As long as we have the raw recordings, it's basically the same sensor-based data, and it makes it much easier to harmonize as these devices evolve. And then, of course, there's the fact that the algorithms are going to evolve as well.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, thank you. I wanted to ask if you would expand more on one of your last comments about who qualifies as a researcher, and I'll tell you why that resonated with me. It seems to me, from my experience in the mental health field, that one of our greatest strengths is also one of our weaknesses. And our strength is we're really good at listening to everybody. And our weakness is that the diagnostic terms we use, the fundamental frameworks we use are so disparate. I was involved in a multi-site study years ago that I think it had 12 different sites. It was an autism study. And by far the strongest predictor of the diagnosis the patient got was which site they came from. And I think that's true in a lot of places. So I struggle with the question of how do we organize ourselves, and are there, for example, funding mechanisms that can be used to try to get everybody to choose a framework? Not to say any framework is perfect, but at least to speak the same language. And I wondered if you had thoughts about how to do that.
Yeah, I actually try to solve that problem through the idea of data sharing, right? Because I think that, like one of the things by the way, I'm failing at this, but one of the things that I've been trying to do at Framingham is figuring out how do I share our data so broadly, right, that I'm not involved, that I won't be on the paper, it won't be used, I won't be an investigator on the grant, et cetera. Because you know what happens? As soon as you pull me in, I got my biases. I got the way I think things should be done. And you know what? I could be wrong. Or I could just be missing something, right? And so for me, working with the data scientists that I've had the opportunity, that's been like mind-blowing opening for me, because suddenly the concept of everything I've been taught about study design, right? Having a consistent study protocol, having the inclusion-exclusion criteria, using multiple regression, methods, et cetera, that they don't care about that. It was literally, I'm like sitting here manually transcribing, each, and I only got to like 270. And then when they went out there and processed like 9,000 in a few weeks, I'm like, whew, wait a minute, right? So they opened up my mind to this whole different way of thinking and doing things that left on my own or staying within my my boundaries, I never would have gotten to. One of the things that we have to worry about a lot, we have to worry about this in general, always, but for some reason, now that I'm in this digital space, it gets brought up a lot. It's data security and privacy, right? I gotta tell you, I used to worry about data security and privacy before I started the digital realm, but it's just become much more out there. And who do you think we need to look to for data science, for data privacy? I thought, who does it best? Oh, that would be the military and the financial institutions. I got introduced to the concept of blockchain at a fintech conference in Hong Kong. I gotta tell you, I was the only AD researcher in that crowd. I was probably the only researcher in that crowd. And, but wow, that really opened my mind to this is what we need to be thinking about, right? So that's what I mean. I think it's very important for us not to predetermine who we think is actually gonna be good. And I have to tell you, I think it's funny, my kids definitely think it's funny that I've been tapped like some digital person, because they're like, have they seen you use your smartphone? And if you ask who's the expert on the digital, it's my kids. And it's the generation after, before that are coming up ahead of them. They're the ones who are gonna crack this open. It turns out it's not gonna be me, right? So I hope that helps, yeah.
Hi, thanks. I have two questions, but let's see how far we get. The first question is, I'm wondering if you could unpack a little bit, and I'm asking this because I don't know exactly who's in the audience, if you could unpack a little bit your distinction between digital phenotyping and a digital biomarker, and what it really means to have a biomarker from your perspective.
Sure. I think digital phenotyping is capturing, right? It's characterizing whatever behavior or a symptom that you're trying to characterize. It's mostly what we do already. Certainly we do that in the neuropsych realm. I think you do it in the mental health realm. I think that's very different from a digital biomarker, because a digital biomarker, by the word biomarker, it does need to be validated. That's the thing that the FDA, that's the thing that you need to put through the FDA in order to get it. And it needs to be a biomarker you want to think about as something that's actually going to be diagnostic. Digital phenotyping right now, it's a tool that allows us to get to a diagnosis. A digital biomarker actually could be potentially that diagnosis, right? And so, what I think is really interesting, and I think that it's both in the mental health field as well as in the neuropsych field, is that we've had these instruments forever. The neuropsych tests that we use, they were created like 30, 40, 50 years ago. Just shoot me now about the MMSE, right? And yet, is there any other tool in the medical arena that continues to rely on something that was developed decades ago, even though our knowledge about it has advanced, right? So if I think about imaging, in the AD field, we have all these PET tracers, right? We have amyloid tracers, we have tau tracers. There's been huge investments in order trying to figure out, are they really picking up the pathology of AD? There has been nothing like that. We're doing that in blood-based biomarkers right now, right? It's all the rage, AD biomarkers, which is great. Well, we need to do that with digital, and we need to do that kind of validation work, just like we do with other biomarkers. And that's why I make that differentiation, because we're taking the easy route, we're taking the easy path, right? We're just saying, oh, if you measured it with digital, we're gonna call it a digital biomarker. Well, that's not it at all. All you've done is capture it digitally. Sometimes you're just literally only capturing it digitally. You're not even doing anything different, right? Maybe you're doing it a little better. That doesn't make it a biomarker.
Yeah, I just want to add one thing to that, which is, or as a question, which is there also in other arenas like blood-based biomarkers, they might be talking about prognostic or predictive biomarkers as well as diagnostic.
Yes.
And so maybe that's something in between the sort of capturing the data, having something that gives you a diagnosis, and having some pattern of digitally acquired behaviors that can predict risk. Is that fair?
certainly they're predicting sort of that, they're predicting whether you're at high risk or not, right? So it's still on that pathway to diagnosis. And I just think that we need to understand we're going to have to do the same hard work, and we're going to have to do the same investment into digital, just like we did with blood-based biomarkers, just like we've done with imaging, you know, et cetera.
Do I have time for one more, or no? Yeah. The second question is the utility of, or the importance of the data science stream in the context of data sharing, and what whether you think it's would be useful to have more centralized tools or systems to allow different people doing different studies. So you're coming from Framingham, but somebody else is doing a different study, somebody else is doing a different study, but they're all going to need to feed stuff through a data science framework of some type and share their data in some way. Is there a need for some kind of centralized system or set of tools that could help individual investigators or individual teams?
Yeah, I tend to be less of an advocate for centralization, because then that sort of puts power into one, and I'm not really a fan of that. So I think I tend to favor more of a decentralized but open science way of doing it, right? So it's certainly building tools that are open source and sharing them and making that sort of available and interlinking. So I'm really interested in this concept of interoperability across interoperability platforms, right? Because all we've been doing in sort of all our data sharing efforts is we've been creating bigger data silos, right? And so what we need to do is we actually need to stop thinking that we need one of anything and think about how do we interlink so that they can all, I actually try not to use the word sharing, because sharing has too much baggage to it, data sharing. So I do things like, you know, data lending, borrowing, you know, accessibility, you know, et cetera. That I kind of try to change that, so just to get to a different mindset of we're trying to work together and bring things together, but we can do it while still being separate, having it in separate places.
Data friendships. I like that.
Yeah, there we go.
Anyway, thanks so much, Dr. Au, for yet another wonderful visionary talk. One more round of applause for Dr. Au.
Thank you.